Good morning, everybody. Okay, we're going to get started here. My name is Laura Boley, and I am the facilitator today. And on behalf of Polar Knowledge and Polar Knowledge Canada and Neole, I'd like to welcome you to the Climate Change webinar. We're pleased to make this webinar available in 3 languages, Inuktitut, French, and English. The slide now displayed shows you where the interpretation button is on your Zoom toolbar and how to select the language that you wish to listen in. Just to note that when Inuktitut is spoken, you can switch to English to hear the interpretation. The interpretation instructions are also in chat. This webinar is the 4th in a series of webinars Polar is launching this month, the Knowledge Sharing webinar series. I invite you to visit our website for more information on other webinars scheduled in the month of March and future webinars. The link to Polar's website will be in chat in just a second. Today's webinar highlights key points of a report on climate change that will be published as part of Polar's Acaliat. Acaliat will be available on Polar's website later this spring. Be sure to check the website and also like Polar's Facebook page and watch those spaces for the announcement about the report publication, future webinars, and also the video recordings from these webinars. Now, I would like to thank all those who have joined us today for this session. I would also like to take time to acknowledge that there are people in this session who are joining us from across the North and across Canada. We acknowledge the valuable contributions Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make, both in respect to sharing your lands, resources, skills, and knowledge. We further acknowledge a past that has done great harm and that much needs to be done to bring about true reconciliation. We appreciate we have an obligation to learn, to listen, to be inclusive and respectful in all our engagements. Today, we are very grateful for being able to have this knowledge sharing and exchange to help make our work be more inclusive and better as a result of incorporating Indigenous knowledge. I now invite Ningula to open our meeting with opening remarks and a prayer.
I haven't done this in a while, so I'll do my best. Thank you all for, okay, welcome everyone. Is it okay if I do it in Inuktitut?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming and taking part today. I'd like to just begin by allowing prayer to our God. May we be guided to ensure the words we use are proper and to ensure that we have strength today. And also, even though I'm humbled and haven't been able to open a prayer in such a long time, I'm humbled and pleased that I was asked. However, may we have a good meeting in knowing that we're secure in the knowledge that He's watching over us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Anne Balasubramaniam to greet us also with some opening remarks. Anne is a policy analyst working with the federal government and a former Polar staff and an author of the Climate Change Report. Anne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today's discussion. I'm excited to stand here among my fellow authors, an esteemed group of individuals that span from coast to coast, north to south. We're very lucky to have had the opportunity to work together, and Polar Knowledge Canada, a science-based organization mandated to advance knowledge of the Canadian North through science, technology, traditional and Indigenous knowledge, has provided us that forum to come together to work on co-developed questions that started in March 2020 at a workshop that was held at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut, Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. And some 12 to 15 members that were Inuit gathered from the region to come together with questions to identify important topics that they wanted more information on. This March 2020 forum that was called the Regional Planning and Knowledge Sharing Workshop had members that are even in our audience today. I just wanted to acknowledge the Honorable Bobby Anavalayak, who is currently a member of the Nunavut Legislative Assembly from Kugluktuk, that was one of those people that came together and brought forward questions that our authors assembled to answer. That effort, that workshop brought fruit to another project called the Collaborative Assessment, where individuals that were Indigenous knowledge holders, authors that were academics, and authors from the co-management complex, as well as federal scientists and policymakers, came together to address those questions from the March 2020 workshop. We put our heads together. It was not necessarily an easy process, as we worked across disciplinary boundaries to bring together our different perspectives towards putting together a paper. But it was an important initiative, I think. And those papers will be published in an upcoming Akaliat journal that Polar Knowledge Canada will put out. And they will be a point of reference to a conversation that will be ongoing, including today's conversation, where I know many other Indigenous voices join us to continue to discuss these important issues. So without too much further ado, I will thank everyone for being here and remind everyone that this is the start of the conversation, and we are very much appreciative of people's time towards this, and we're looking forward to the questions that everyone puts forward going forward. Thank you so much, and thanks Polar Knowledge for providing us this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Anne. And thanks for giving us the background on the climate change report. And we can't wait to hear from everybody today. As Anne explained, the thematic questions upon which the climate change research and monitoring report was based were the outcome of the March 2020 Regional Planning and Knowledge Sharing Workshop held at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut. As the climate change report nears publication, it's only fitting that we revisit these original questions during this webinar with our panelists today, the Indigenous knowledge holders, community members, and authors who contributed to the report and are interested in bridging gaps in knowledge and emerging opportunities presented in the report. We all know that questions create more questions. As you listen to the discussion, we invite you to type your questions in the Q&A space by clicking on the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. In just a second, yep, here comes the slide showing us where the Q&A button is on your toolbar. We are also watching the chat for questions, and we'll try to make sure that your questions are answered, if not today, then at a later date. I'd like to welcome everybody joining us now. My apologies for the incorrect times in Eventbrite, and for those of you who got a message that the webinar was over already, I think I must have selected the wrong time in Eventbrite, and then time change, of course. So yes, I'm glad to see all the attendee numbers coming up now, and welcome to everybody. Just to let you know that Lena, maybe you could just show the interpretation slide again. Would you be able to do that? Sorry for putting you on the spot. Today's webinar is being interpreted into 3 languages, Inuktitut, French, and English. And we'll just drop the instructions in chat again as well. And if you want to listen in on English, choose the English channel, or you can choose French or Inuktitut. Thank you. And then just before we start, I'd like to invite our panel members and those of you in the audience to do 2 things. First, I invite you to be comfortable with silence. And I need to get comfortable with tech glitches. But just to say that this is a discussion more than a presentation today, and gaps in conversation will happen. We'll be making space for people to compose their thoughts and to contribute. Second, I did want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, and the recordings will be made available later on this spring. And for those of you who are not able to be here today, you'll still be able to see that later on. Finally, I also invite you to be curious. Please put your questions in the Q&A function or in chat. So let's get to know our panelists today. I'd like to invite Johnny, please, just to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from.
I'm Johnny Lenny. I'm from Inuvik, Northwest Territories. For some of you don't know where Inuvik is, it's right at the Mackenzie Delta. We're about 100 miles inland from the Beaufort Sea. Thank
you. And Ningula, you have a few people with you today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Yes, I have here with me. Say mata. Unali. Kayla, ano ta kasunod? Ninyo kapit siya.
You. Nice to see you all again. Stephen.
Hi, Stephen Lonsdale.
Hi, it's me, Stephen Lonsdale. I'm with NWMB, Nunavut Wildlife Management Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up on my screen is Gita. Would you mind introducing yourself, where you're from and where you're joining us from? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gita Lubicic, Monoa Gita Lubicic, Ovanga Gita Lubicic, Ottawa Mutauyunga
I'm Gita Lubicic. I'm from Ottawa. I'm in Ottawa.
And I'm originally from Ottawa. I'm living in Hamilton now, just outside Toronto. And I'm a professor at McMaster University. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Very much, Gita. Thanks for joining us today. Jamie.
Hi, my name is Jamie Snook, and I'm the executive director of the Torngat Wildlife and Plants Co-Management Board that was set up from the Naziavut land claim agreement over on the East Coast. And I'm attending today from traditional Innu and Inuit lands in Happy Valley Goose Bay in Central Labrador. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome. Dennis.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Dalor. I'm the Director for Wildlife at the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board. I'm glad my colleague Stephen is also here. The Nunavut Wildlife Management Board is the main instrument for wildlife management in Nunavut. I am joining today from Iqaluit.
Thank you, Dennis. And Allison.
Good morning. I'm Allison Perrin. I work at Yukon University as a researcher, and I'm also a student at Carleton University. I'm attending today from my home in Mount Lorne, Yukon. It's just outside Whitehorse on the traditional territories of the Carcross-Tagus First Nation and the Kwamandun First Nation.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience while we sort out some of the technical issues today. So I'd like to invite any one of our Indigenous knowledge holders, and Niola, you'll need to I don't know, turn your camera on and wave, because you've got 4 of you there in the room. So I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. So if you hear a question or something that you would like to respond to, please just, wave or raise your hand, or just otherwise, flag me down virtually if you can. Anyways, the first topic today, yeah, thank you. The first topic today is, what does food security mean to you?
Oh,
And
okay.
Actually, you have
Sorry,
your
it's
camera
lunch hour
on.
here, so.
Can I ask you, what does food security mean to you?
Kinamot ka
Uwag,
mo.
uwag tinukal yung mabe. Nililaw lang ay sa'yo matawag nga.
Okay, I'm going to respond to that. It's me, Saimata. Food security is very important, and it's important to have a food and a food source, because it's vital to our daily requirements. We need to continue to be able to eat, and we need to continue to have country foods, and we also need store-bought food, and it's vital to have it on a daily basis. And so I'm happy that there is food security right now. Thank you.
You. Anybody else who's with you? What does food security mean to you?
Hi,
Yeah, I can add a bit to and agree with what Saimatak said. In our community, it's exciting to know that the food is shared by our harvesters, local hunters. And so it's always wonderful when that takes place. So it increases food security. And so I feel that we need to be welcoming, not just of people, of human, but we also have to welcome our food. It's our nature and our culture. So whenever someone shares their food, we have to welcome that and embrace that the food is ready, they're available to us, so that we may have good vibes, spirit from the food. And so it's exciting when the sharing that is happening. Also, even when you have food security, one of the things we have to realize is that we have to be able to store food for long-term use. That's an important part.
Thank you. Donnie, what does food security mean to you?
Sunny Kanois.
Oh.
Oops.
Sorry, that's okay. Go ahead. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Johnny. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Food security. For what it means to me and a lot of other people is having the ability to harvest for actual food and animals we eat, and also fish and just being able to do that. And also like on a ad, like we, in the past, we used to harvest a lot of fur bearing animals, you know, not only for eating, but we used to be able to sell the furs, and that, you know, in the past it contributed to our food security because we're able to sell the furs and have income to actually, you know, pay for other things that we don't get off the land. And that's what food security is to me. Good night, Nick.
You. Stephen.
Thank you. When food security is so tied closely to culture, intertwined with culture, it just actually means everything. It's about practicing customs. It's about learning language, interaction with knowledge holders, learning new skills. It's just part of growing up and being embedded in your own culture. So it's a very communal thing that is not only about food, but that food and nourishment is also a very, very important part, because, you know, it's weird because we're kind of used to food insecurity, which is a very bad thing to become used to. And when you're hungry, nothing else matters. Like, you can't study, you can't think right, you know, all those things start to break down when you're not able to have reliable, you know, sources of food. So, you know, it's kind of a loaded question, but it does actually mean everything. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, I see you nodding your head and sort of pondering. Any thoughts on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, no, it was really interesting responses. And I know that in our report, we focused more on wild foods and being on the land more so than food security from the perspective of buying it in the local stores and stuff. So that was an interesting dimension. That makes total sense. It's just not one that we focused a lot on in our report. And we focused more on, is there enough wild foods and can we get it? And are they still healthy foods? And it was really interesting with Johnny and Stephen's comments as well, that I know it connects with some research that I'm familiar with in the Natsivut related to food security and caribou as an example that have been declining. And I know there's a good quote from one of the knowledge holders in Nain who talked about how caribou was the reason they would go out on the land, but then everything else happened from there. So similar to Stephen's comments, that's when knowledge was then passed on, skills were learned, experience was gained, culture lived on, and that's where all of these other well-being benefits emerged and were associated with being out on the land. So I think that's really interesting as we go on in the conversation, that we're talking about climate change and food security, but there's really this holistic perspective and well-being that all connects with this as well. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on food security? Yeah, Dennis.
Thank you, Lauren. Very interesting comments from Kayla, Johnny, Stephen, Simatak, all of that. That is very interesting. I would like to, if I may, ask a follow-up question to Stephen and maybe a little bit to Kayla. Stephen talked about food security meaning everything, and Kayla talks about sharing, and Johnny talked about how even the economic aspects of harvesting in turn contribute to food security because it allows you to buy the things that you cannot harvest on the land. I'd like to know what to them is the contribution of country food to food security. How important is it? And are those dynamics changing?
Dennis, I'm sorry, was that a question for our panelists today?
Yes, it was a question to Stephen or to Johnny or even Kayla. Any of them want to contribute? I was just asking to them how food security, how country food contribute to food security, and if they are seeing changes where they are.
Yeah.
In that relationship. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, Stephen.
Because country food is like there's such a need to share. If that wasn't in place, if this custom was not in place, the North would have far more food insecurity, because the level of sharing by harvesters is just, I don't see that anywhere else. You know, and because there are less and less hunters, I guess, or maybe the skill set maybe with younger hunters is just not as the same as, you know, my grandpa or my uncle, that can, like, culture, like being immersed in your culture affects food security because of your skills. So there's, I think, an increasing pressure on harvesters to, you know, to get more, to want to help. And, you know, 25, even 50 years ago, it's almost like everybody was a hunter. And then with everyone sharing all the time, it was a little bit easier. And now we have, you know, less and less full-time hunters. So I think those food sharing networks are more challenging. And even for those like me, I work and I hunt when I'm on vacation or on the weekend. So I don't, although I hunt, I don't consider myself a hunter. And if I bought, you know, $300 worth of groceries, it's different trying to share that because it, you know, it just costs so much, it seems like. But then if I spend $300 on gas and bullets and I get lots more meat because it's part of the custom, it's just easier to share country food. So, you know, I in my own experience anyway, it does seem to be changing. And though that's why you hear for a lot of hunters wanting more support. It's not that they can't, you know, afford things. It's just that there's so much pressure from people, and it's not, you know, it's not unfair pressure. It's just that hunters always want to share. They always want to give more and more. And so it just gets harder and harder to do that. So yeah, I guess that is definitely, there is a shift. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen. Ingula, you have somebody there who wishes to speak?
Yeah, thank you. It's me, Kayla. I could add that, how could I put this? The harvesters, the hunters, when they go out hunting, that it's nice when they hand out meat to the communities, and only because when they're able to, it's not an afforded luxury, but it's like when they're able to get it. And they also go on the local radio to say, come and get the ptarmigan or come and get seal meat. The only thing is about caribou meat is that it's not normal anymore to hear that kind of come over and get some, because it's not the same setup as it was in the older days or more recent times, because there are quotas now. However, let's say my husband, my partner, if he goes to his parents, we sometimes take part when they go out on the land. So they invite us to take part, let's say when they go fishing. And so his parents will share the fish that they caught to my family and others. That's all I could say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. I'd just like to take a second to welcome Norman Mike, who has joined us now as a panelist. Thank you, Norman. I'm really glad that you're able to join us. Are you able to introduce yourself or?
Hi, hi Laura and
Hi.
everyone. Norman Mike Panagtumil.
Yeah, it's me, Norman Mike from Panagtuk. Nakomik, thank you.
Thank you. Also, a reminder for our audience, if you have a question for the panelists, please click on the Q&A button that you can find on your Zoom toolbar, and you can put your questions there. We are also watching chat for your questions and comments as well. So switching over a little bit to focus on climate change. Gita, there you are. We're wondering, how is climate change impacting food security?
Yeah, thank you for sharing perspectives on food security. Everything that I just heard is so important to keep in mind, and it relates to, we developed this infographic as part of our report, which I could share, or maybe if one of you have it handy, it's easier for you to share. But just thinking about how climate change can impact all different aspects of Indigenous food security. And we just heard some of those. And Jamie alluded to it as well earlier. Yeah, there it is. Thank you so much. We tried to summarize some of the key points that we have heard from community partners over the years, that representatives on our authorship team working with co-management boards have been highlighting, and also what came out from the questions initially that we're trying to answer in this report. That climate change can impact food security in many ways, but we tried to focus on these three questions that you see here. And so is there enough is really about food availability. Is there enough? Are there enough wildlife or plants that are really of interest in different communities, that are key species for harvesting? So that's abundance. Are there, how many individuals are there for a species or a herd? And diversity. So what different kinds of animals are available? And are there enough to support the harvesting around each community? We also looked at food accessibility, which is that question of, can we get it? And we've already heard a few really important points on that, about some of the factors that affect people traveling on the land for hunting or harvesting. And so climate changes, if they're affecting ice conditions or trail conditions or snow conditions or unpredictable weather, it would challenge people's ability to travel safely and also to be able to access foods, country foods. And Stephen, you just mentioned about time constraints as well. Those are important to keep in mind. Work schedules, school schedules, commitments, all affect the time that people have for travel. And if travel is needed, if people need to travel further to access the animals, that can be really affected by unpredictable weather or changing conditions, and so have economic impacts as well, or economic factors might limit the ability to travel. The last one there that you see in that graphic is do we want to eat it? That's a really important question, and that relates to food quality, which could be nutritional value. Specifically, it could be taste or smell or the appearance of the food, but it's also the nutritional value, which we hear so often, how important, how nutritional country foods are, and not only physically, but for the cultural connections and well-being and the aspects that were mentioned before, that it's connected to everything, and overall physical and mental well-being to have access to quality country food. So I'll leave it at that, but just to highlight, this is how we were trying to summarize some of the key points in the report, and I would love to hear more from the other panelists here about these questions, or are there other things we should be thinking about to understand the impacts of climate change on food security?
Nicola, I see that you have your microphone off. Would one of your ladies like to speak?
Kinalima mo professor. Taman na ya. Kiyo kalalo tampo na.
I'll answer very briefly.
Every year change
We know that our ice is changing yearly. Sometimes the ice conditions can be late. But even though that's the case, even if our ice is changing, we know the animals are still there to harvest. I'm also a worker, but whenever I can get out to go out and catch wildlife, I'll go. Some of the things that you asked about in your infographic, it's interesting that those are good questions to ask knowledge keepers. And it would be good to do research along the line of, yes, how is our climate affecting our food sources and on the patterns of our daily living and harvesting. And I'm looking at Saimata. Okay, me too. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, of course, the question you asked is, can we eat them? But a lot of people will know we can differentiate if the food is not edible. It's common knowledge. And just wanted to make a point of that also. whenever the hunters come in and arrive back to the community, whenever they did get a good harvest or any catch, and whenever there's, let's say, a catch of fish or ptarmigan, I kind of lost my track of mind. Was trying to get a good way to answer. Okay, I'll try to do this way. Yeah, I'll just end there because I lost my train of mind. Okay, I'll end there. If you were able to understand what I was trying to get at, I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Inuktitun musukkama ilannikku.
I'll speak in Inuktitut, and I like to practice speaking in Inuktitut because it helps me to develop my language further. Whenever you go out seal hunting on the flowage in Iqaluit on the Frobisher Bay, I go out on that ice. My older brother has a cabin. I think I was about 30, so that would have been about 15 years ago. I want to share a story briefly. When we tried to come back, the ice was starting to change. I noticed that it was starting to get smaller ice. The old ice is not the same back then. Around the American channels, I noticed the ice break up differently now. That's further down from Frobisher Bay area. So one of the things I've noticed in Iqaluit as well, common area where people go catch seal, we used to go and catch it by sea ice. But sometimes we weren't able to reach it because of the ice condition was so terrible. And so only this year, there was more solid ice. So we were able to reach that area where for quite a number of years, we weren't able to get there before. So that's how much things have changed. Thank you.
Norman, I just wanted to invite you to comment if you would like to.
Hi.
Hi, yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are we having sun alignment, I guess? Where I live, it's pretty bright now, and satellites and sun's been aligning at this hour and giving us some connection. I had to move to another place from where I live, and I didn't really fully get the question, but I assume I'm going to speak in Inuktitut.
I'll speak in Inuktitut. When I was growing up, maybe since the time I was a youth, I didn't really attend school. And the times in my youth, I would be going out on the land more hunting because my grandfather, I was so close to him that I wanted to be with him more to go out hunting. and that close connection, I wanted it to remain strong. So somebody commented about that this year, the ice is a lot more solid and thicker. And so I think when I was I'm trying to say, since I was a young person, what I've noticed is that I haven't seen a very drastic change. There's been no drastic changes to the ice condition. It kind of have remained similar every year. And if we're going to talk about it, we have to admit as in Inuk that we have to be qualified to talk about such matters. So we follow our elders and we follow our wildlife and our hunting techniques. So I would have to be quantified to speak on it. So we have to look for those that are quantified to speak. And when the food security programs that are provided by the governments, I feel they're not benefiting individual families. And perhaps it is benefiting as a whole in terms of the communities, but certainly not for individual families. And it's not creating a connectedness like you have with food that are close to Inuit food that are connected, country food that are connected to families that provide the ties and the connections. It's not the same way of, there are differences now in how people are connecting and interrelating to one another. The hunters and trappers in Panaktuk are starting the practice of buying country food from hunters, whether they buy whatever is caught. It doesn't matter what species or animal, they're starting to buy it. And it's been ongoing for quite a number of years now, because these are the reasons why what we're talking about, the importance of food in our culture. This is the reason why it's happening and why we have to because it's our preference, because it's so tied to our culture. We want to have it available to us. I cannot really comment about ice. I'm not too sure. Sometimes a hunter will fall through the ice. It's part of a hunting. That happens occasionally. And I just wanted to mention that briefly. I know it's exciting as a man, as a hunter, a harvester. You want to be out hunting and on the land and to provide food for your family and your communities. It's part of who you are and your makeup, your identity. And the animals, and those are, if they're available, then you want to go. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Anne, do you have a comment about the government programs?
So much, Laura and Norman, for your comments. I think if I could ask for the photo to be back, the infographic to be put back on the screen. I think something that came out of being part of the authorship group is the idea that when we talk about these issues for Inuit and Northerners, whether you're Gwich'in, Dene, You see food security, you see hunting as all part of culture and practice, and it's all tied together. However, I think when we try to break it down to decide how to address the problem, Norman, as you were saying, for food security, we can sometimes look at it in smokestacks or silos. So if you think about a smokestack, as my friend and former colleague Donald talks about, you might think about, is there enough, the number of wildlife, and that's kind of the area and the realm of the co-management boards. And then you think about how can we get it and access, and maybe there's government programs such as those at CERNA that offset hunter-harvester programs that are providing a little bit of money towards gas, or through the Hunters and Trappers organization, there might be a little bit of extra money for gas or equipment repair. And then there might be a separate program looking at research and monitoring around food quality. But as some ladies on the panel said here, sometimes that knowledge exists in the community. So when you think about climate change effects on the food security in northern food systems, I think that dynamic funding for all components, maybe that's what you mean, Norman, doesn't really exist. But I think through our monitoring programs and through northern organizations, we're starting to see some exciting initiatives. At the top left of the diagram, you can see that there's a discussion about, or some pictures to depict how Inuit and others in the north are adapting by bridging different ways of knowing. There was a story told by individuals, Chiquita Grubin and Brian Park, a former member of the IRCC, who said that in the Inuvialuit region, there was workshops about creating new words in Inuktitut or the Inuvialuit dialect of Inuktitut to describe the conditions that have changed due to climate change, because previously elders there hadn't seen anything like that. So they're working together with researchers and community elders to come up with a new word. And there's also initiatives across the north for increasing elder and youth programs so that they can reinvigorate intergenerational knowledge transfer. So Norman, I agree with you. There isn't one program that addresses everything, but there's all these different initiatives. And I know that there's some great examples of community-led programs that are talking about this.
Thank you, Anne. I'd just like to invite any of our panelists to make any further comments on what Anne was telling us about. Very comprehensive. I am just listening over the course of the 4 webinars now. The interconnectedness of everything is just incredible. But any comments on what Anne is talking about, or on how climate change is impacting food security? Yeah, Dennis.
Thank you, Laura. One thing that I wanted to hopefully initiate a more discussion about is differences in what people are experiencing across the North and how those differences play out in different regions. For example, if you go back to those 3 questions, not every community, like Norman said, he doesn't know, or he doesn't have enough experience to talk about sea ice changes, and he's not noticed that much personally. But somebody in another part of the North would have seen that changes in sea ice conditions are actually affecting people's ability to get out on the land and affecting knowledge sharing, as Anne was alluding to. And also the species, a lot, different parts of the North depend on different wildlife species for to achieve their food security. And what is happening, who is seeing what? And so those inter-regional or geographical differences in how climate change is affecting food security, a very important perspective to share. And that is some of the things that we considered in the paper. In some communities, for example, it may be impossible for people to access this particular species. I'm thinking maybe McClintock China polar bears. There's some communities there that, because of recent changes in sea ice conditions, rough sea ice conditions, they can no longer access that polar bears in that particular management unit. Whereby, if you go down to the to southern Hudson Bay and western Hudson Bay, the situation there is that there are just too many polar bears coming into the community, such that people are concerned about not being able to express themselves culturally by going out on the land and harvesting a polar bear, and now they just have to go to the dam and get a polar bear. So those interregional or geographical differences are very important in this discussion, and I would like to, if possible, some of our Indigenous partners to talk about it.
Stephen, I see your hand up. Johnny, I think you had your hand up too. So if you'd like to comment after Stephen, I can come back to you. Stephen?
Actually, no, I'd like Johnny to go ahead, please. Thank you.
Okay, Johnny.
I'll go next.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I just had to put something in before it gets too far along, because I had a lot of jotted down a lot of comments on the different questions. First of all, in relation to climate change, I'll speak about 3 different seasons: winter, spring, and fall. Definitely fall harvesting. Fall freeze up is definitely later. The last half a dozen years, maybe 10 years, and freeze up is later, and does definitely affect our fall fishing on the ice. And usually our caribou and other big game is usually hunted by boat and earlier, before the rutting, and rutting is usually in October, and October is usually freeze up, and we usually start fishing for our use for the winter while the ice is still thin. And so that's affected us. But when you look back and talk to elders, when I was young, we used to do a lot of trapping, like I said before, and we used to trap a lot of mink in the Delta. But mink season doesn't open till November 10th. And talking to some elders, that they remember talking to their parents that they're trapping mink with boats. That's November 10th. And for here, it's usually frozen up by October 10th, ever since I was a kid. So, it's like, is it climate change? I definitely am not doubting it or nothing. But, is it a warming trend? Is it happened before? Is there records? I'm not sure, but that's what I hear from elders in the past, that there was like warming trends, and like it affected their way of life before. And also in the winter, definitely winter, we used to have 40 below for 40 days, like every winter, no problem. Nowadays, actually this winter was probably the coldest winter, like Stephen said, it was a cold winter. It was a cold winter, but still we barely got 40 below, but we got a lot of 35, minus 35 with the wind. And like I said, we live in 100 miles from the coast, and we're inland. And usually when it's 30 below, minus 30, it's usually calm. And, minus 35 with a, gusting wind, you guys know all how it feels. And that's different. And as far as spring has been sort of definitely get warmer earlier, but it's still all the same time. Like I remember my dad saying when I was younger that, the geese hit the Delta around May 12th. Definitely that really hasn't changed. Maybe they come a day, a couple of days earlier, maybe a couple of days later, depending on the weather and the wind. But it's definitely warmer. Yeah, you get a few flocks earlier, but the main big flocks usually hit the delta. But what we noticed too is that they'll fly right on. They'll just don't even hardly even stop. They used to stage in the delta for sometimes up to a couple of weeks, and we have lots of time to hunt, especially when it was cold and frozen on the coast. But now it's warm all the way to the coast. They just fly right over the delta and go right to their nesting grounds. I just wanted to add that. And as far as like economics and food security, so few people were around here. There's a lot more moose in the delta, since when I was growing up. So a lot of people harvest moose, alternative to caribou. And just for example, we got a big bull moose. I done little economics there. A big bull moose a couple of years ago. Just from the neck, we got 40 2-pound bags of meat. Like we ground it up right just from the neck. So 80 pounds of meat. But for a 2-pound hamburger in the store, it's like $25. So if you put a price value on it, just for that neck of that moose, we got like $1,000 worth of meat. So at 300, it does cost $300 to go for gas and goods to go out. Like Stephen said, it does cost money, but that justifies it. Okay, thank you.
Johnny. Stephen, just a minute. Any responses from our other, from the authors on Johnny's comments? Okay. It's interesting about the wind, Johnny. Lauren, who's not on today, has commented a few times about the wind, the increase in the wind. Yeah. Stephen, please.
Thank you. I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'll keep this short so as not to dominate the discussion too much. Speaking to the regional differences, I was once involved in a project that did a traditional calendar for specific communities. And the calendar would list the ice seasons as well as the migratory schedules of the different animals. And we went from Ngakto to Rikatarjuap, Kangatugapik, where else was there? There was Pond Inlet, Mitimatarik, Ipperjuk, and Grease Fjord. And the differences in the seasons from one community to another, even when they're right next to each other, was different. And so when we speak of regional differences, we think of the North as all the same animals. It's cold, whatever. We can't think in that manner. And so when we try to come up with solutions, it shouldn't be a blanket approach. I found it very different talking with other Inuit. I was speaking with some high school students, and I said, I used to go skidooing on the ice near the end of November, sometimes even middle of November, depending on the season. And now I can't get on the ice till January. And all their eyes just went wide and said, I can't imagine waiting that long to go on the ice, because that's, I don't know about other parts of the Arctic, but around Nunavut, that's our highway. And so when the seasonal differences in Iqaluit alone are getting into, 2-month difference, it'll be different as you go further north, but there will be also other ones that affect, climate change will affect different communities in different ways, because each community has its own personality, has its own priorities. When you think is like, we're known for clams. You go to, Qitamni or Kivaluk, they're known for caribou. You go to Pond Inlet, it's narwhal. And so given, you know, each community's kind of personality, the adaptations will also be different. So I just want to share with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to say that thank you everybody for staying on. We are going on a little bit longer because of the delay in starting, but we are going to wrap up in about 7 minutes. So I just wanted to switch. I think for me, what Stephen just spoke to must be one of the challenges for monitoring and the research, is that such a vast territory and such differences in how the climate might be impacting. So I wonder if one of our authors might speak to what monitoring is taking place now, and are we doing enough monitoring?
Well, I wouldn't mind making some quick comments on that, but I know other authors as well. This was a topic that we were all really interested in, and I'd be curious to know how climate change itself has affected monitoring. But from this perspective, I guess in Nunavut, I would like to get a plug out there and say that one of the things that we notice is when it comes to government funds and monitoring, sometimes it's a lot harder to get monies directed towards the north and what we see allocated in the south, especially when it comes to fisheries and federal departments like the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, I can think of. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed. And in terms of a co-management board in this region, we've been able to fill in gaps where we can, and we've been doing monitoring of snow crab, for example, monitoring of caribou, monitoring of moose, and we've done various Inuit knowledge studies where we've documented. Inuit themselves obviously are monitoring how things are going. So we're doing as much as we can and filling in niche areas that government doesn't seem to be targeting. But I would end by saying I think there can be a lot more done, and there needs to be more done, because without monitoring, governments tend to want to put in place harvesting bans and things of that nature, which are very detrimental to food security and in continuing on traditional practices. So I'll leave it there because I see a bunch of hands going up. So I just wanted to get those comments in. Thank you.
Sure. Allison.
Hi, I was just thinking a lot about that discussion of silos, and I think we also think about the causes of these issues in silos, and that it's climate change, but it's also those layers of resource development and impacts of people on the land. And here in the Yukon also there's kind of a growing population of non-Indigenous hunters as well that put added pressure. And then also thinking about how we respond is often in silos. So there was a really good question about what government organizations can do. And I think sometimes organizations want to focus on what they can control in their programs, but really we need to think about how we respond and how we adapt in a more holistic way. So what are other organizations able to do on top of what governments can do, and how can they come together to make sure that their resources are working together to respond holistically, instead of each organization and government approaching these issues on their own and thinking only about their own programming. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Allison. Dennis.
Thank you. Just to add a little bit, and I'll step back from Alice and Jamie's contribution to say, based on what the idea in the paper is that there is a need to respond. There is a need to anticipate what is happening to plan for how we are going to respond and to come up with a framework. What will the framework for of country food security under climate change looks like? And from a wildlife management board perspective, what we've heard repeatedly has been the pillar of that framework is we have to expand monitoring. We have to expand monitoring beyond the 6-week window where most science surveys take place. We have to involve people who live on the land and people who see these changes happening during 365 days of the year. And we have to build capacity for these people to meaningfully contribute by telling their own stories, by documenting what they are seeing. And through that medium, also tell us what solutions are possible. And we have to do that in an inclusive way that includes Indigenous knowledge as well. And all of this have been leading to many communities in Nunavut that I'm aware of, and I guess elsewhere, and projects like Jamie was talking about, wanting to start their own monitoring program. They want to do it for themselves. They want to inform their own decision-making position. They want to be able to better represent themselves and share their own knowledge that is collected by their own hands. And from that perspective, community-based monitoring is essential to anything that we are talking about today. And if I could just, the NWMB started in 2012, a community-based monitoring network, which I think in Nunavut or even in the North is one of the longest. It's in its 10 years now, and we've gone over close to 10 communities in Nunavut, and it's just an ongoing program that relies on harvesters to tell us what they are already seeing out there on the land, just to carry a device that allow them to collect data that tell their story. And that information is feeding back to wildlife decision-making processes and really providing rich information on which the authorities that make decisions can rely on.
Thank you, Dennis. Ningula, Kayla, Simata, Ningula too. I wonder if you have any final comments on what you have heard about community monitoring or food in general, climate change impact on food. I invite you to make any final remarks and to also give some closing remarks and a prayer, please.
Yeah.
Yes. I'll ask my other people here in the room if they have any comments.
Thank you.
As I don't have any right now. I know in November we used to be able to skidoo on the ice. And yes, our winter was definitely colder this season. I think that the weather is definitely changing. Thank you, all of you. It was good to hear from this session. Thank you. Thank you. It's me, Kayla. Just similar to what Samantha said, I agree with her that the weather, the climate is changing. Some year like this past season, it was particularly cold. I've seen it myself firsthand. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to listen to this session right now.
Thank you. Any final closing remarks from our panelists? Thank you.
Mana.
And do you want me to say the prayer now for
Yes,
closing?
please. That would be great. Thank you.
Khagan namin good
Yes, thank you. Dear Lord, I pray to you today that we ask for you for your protection, and thank you for watching over us during this meeting and in our daily lives, and that the process of learning is always on a daily basis, no matter how it comes to us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. I did just want to make a couple of points. The climate change report will be published later this spring in Polar's Caveat, which you will be able to find on the Polar website. But again, that's probably not for, I don't have a date. Later this spring, we'll say. And the report does include those lovely infographics. In fact, every one of the 5 reports that will be published is going to be translated into several languages, and the infographics as well. So I don't know if we have the link available, Teresa, maybe to put in chat again to the Polar's website. Thank you. Also watch Polar's Facebook page for announcements and for of the report publication and any future webinars and video recordings. Thank you for all your great questions and comments today. We will be able to answer the questions. Any that we didn't get to today will be coming probably to a blog somewhere on the Polar website in the near future. So next week, we have 2 more webinars in this series. The one on next Wednesday is on whales and marine ecosystems. And the final one is on Canada and the Antarctic. And that one is next Thursday. So I hope that you can join us again. You can register for those on Eventbrite. And the first thing I'm going to do now is make sure that the times are correct on the Eventbrite page so that everybody gets in easily next week. Thank you again to all of our panelists. Special thank you to our interpreters who have been making sure that we can all understand each other and working very hard. So have a great day, everyone. And thank you again. We'll see you next week.